Start recording. Now, I wanted to just connect with everybody. We had your midterms last class or last Monday. Everyone finished their exam. I think there's only one student that even needed the 40 minutes, but I think almost everyone finished much sooner. So I don't think time was an issue, but personally, I wanted the students' overall scores to be better. We had 3 students get in the 80% and above mark, but the rest of the class was most of the class was in the 70s. There were some students in the 60s. And I don't know whether it's, you know, Anastasia says the camera is very nerve-wracking. I'm so sorry, Anastasia. But yeah, there's no alternative. I mean, if you sit in a classroom, there's a professor watching you. It's interesting that I don't get any of the videos. So it does its own monitoring and it only sends me the video if it flags something. So I don't actually see any of my students, which is kind of weird, or maybe I don't know how to do it. But I know that it will flag if it sees something weird that's not accounting. Test anxiety for me. Yeah, it's a weird system. I mean, exams are supposed to be supervised, and you don't want to run them. You can have take homes. I'm not a big fan of the take home exam. But the good thing is now you're used to the lockdown browser. The final exam is much easier because the content is generally easier. So I don't think it should be too bad. Um, I had a thought about what I wanted to do today, but we'll get some feedback on from everybody. I was thinking that we'll go through all the questions and identify all the correct answers. I know you're not going to see them on the final exam, but it might give you an idea as to where you went off track. Would that be useful for students?
I would love it because I always wonder where, even though like I think I got it right, and it's just I would love to do that.
All right, let's do that first. Our lecture today isn't very long. It's presenting qualitative research. It's 5 or 6 slides, so we definitely have time to do it. So let's go through all the questions. Now, what I want you to do is um, I want to make sure we go through all the 40 questions. So when you took the exam, what happened was I made sure that the questions were scrambled, which means the number one question for student number one and student number two would be quite different. And so would the options be. So I'm just going to go through my original master sequence. So we will cover all the questions, but at the same time, we won't be going in the order that you necessarily saw the questions appear on your exam. Does that make sense? Okay, super, good. All right, let's do that. All right, we'll get started now. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so this is how you can see my screen now. This is how the exam's set up for like when I set it up, and then it does all the scrambling when it shows up on your screens. All right, so research questions are useful. And so when taking the question, it looks research skills are useful. If you have 4 choices and the correct answer is in many jobs as well as in everyday life. Okay. You'll find this a little annoying, and I apologize. I don't have any way around it. It doesn't have a next arrow, so I can jump to the next question. So each time I have to open a new window, but that's fine. We'll still go through all the questions. So that's question number 1. Question number 2. People can have at least 2 kinds of authority: authority based on position and authority based on knowledge. Let me know if I'm going too fast, if you want me to slow down, because in my head, I'm going slow, but that's not a fair assessment. So just ask me to slow down if you think I'm going too fast. Question number 3. Yep, we have a comment. Give me a second. It doesn't let me see comments. Can you read number 1 again? Casey says. Yes, of course, Casey. Did you want the question and the answers, Casey? Okay, wonderful. We'll go back to question number 1 because there was a request to do question 1 over. So the question is, research skills are useful, blank, and the answer is in many jobs as well as in everyday life. Okay. So we've done question 2. I don't think there's a request to go through question 2 again. So we'll just go through question 4. We've done we haven't done question 3. Let's go to question 3. Everything's being recorded, so don't worry that you're missing out on a question because you can always go back to the recording and look at the questions, okay? Knowledge is a product of social processes. Question 4. To evaluate the opinions of authorities, what do we review? We review their expertise. Question 5. The production of knowledge usually begins. What's usual starting point? When do we start to produce knowledge? When public governments or some group of experts realize that the state of knowledge in some area is no longer adequate. That's when the production of knowledge begins. Starts with a question, starts with a hunch, becomes a researchable question. At some point, it's shaped into that, and then it goes on to be studied and to create knowledge. Question number 6. Chat says, just going into the chat window for a second, we have a comment. Oh, okay, just your own comments, no problem. Okay, well. Yeah, so part of it is you have to be, one of the things I did mention in the instruction is some of the choices can appear pretty close. You really want to pick the best answer. Sometimes I'll give you an example of a situation where there can be a second choice that looks like it could be right, but it really isn't. And there are very few of those question types. So this question says, if you decide on a blank approach for your research topic, you will select variables and find measures prior to gathering evidence. This is typical for quantitative research. You decide once you identify your concept, you choose your variables and you find measures. So if you picked quantitative, that would be the correct answer. Question 7. Designing and devising measures for variables occurs in blank of the research process. This is all part of phase 1. Phase 1 is the biggest and lengthiest phase, and you want to get all of those pieces correct. And one of those important pieces in phase 1, which has, I believe, almost 8 steps. If we don't even include the ethics process, it's still about 8 different steps. So in phase 1, you devise and you design variables, and you have the measures for them. Question 8. A research question. What is a research question? A research question is a smaller fragment of a larger question. I mean, you might have a very large question to ask, such as how do people address loneliness challenges as they get older? That's a massive question, and probably unanswerable because it's so broad. A smaller fragment might look like, how do you use technology to mitigate loneliness in long-term care homes. That's a smaller fragment of a larger question. So research question is always a smaller fragment of a larger question. The research question is not determined by the research methodology. That would be awful if you had to have the methodology first and then ask the question later. So anyway, and all the other options don't fit, they're incorrect. So a couple of questions which are a little bit of a thinking question because they describe a problem. Miguel has just completed in-depth interviews with a small group of young men and women about the kinds of concerns they have about finding jobs after completing their university degrees. He now begins the process of poring over the interview data for the purpose of identifying themes. So everything is telling you it's qualitative research, right? Miguel's research project is an example of blank. So that first option has to be qualitative. So automatically you get rid of two of the other options involving blank of the research process. So he already has the interview. So he's already collected the data, right? So he's completed phase 2 of qualitative research. So the logical choice here is qualitative research and phase 3, which is the first choice. Empirical or measurable research is most capable of answering questions involving sensory data. It can't tell you anything about whether something is right or wrong. It's not a moral, it doesn't answer moral questions. It doesn't answer philosophical questions about the meaning of life, or it doesn't get into questions of divine supreme power. Sensory data is data that can be sensed, can be detected, can be measured. In a sense, sensory data is empirical data. So empirical research is most capable of answering questions involving sensory data.
Krishnan, I'm sorry to jump in, but you can't see the chat right now. Several of us wanted to go back to that previous question, the one with Miguel, because we were wondering, like, we chose phase 2, and like it seemed in the text that the sort of the analysis of data, like that kind of analysis of data, was considered phase 2.
Oh, let's go back to that question.
Yeah.
One sec.
Thank you. Sorry to
Sure.
interrupt.
No, that's fine. Well, so the challenge here is that he's already collected the data, processing and analysis. So when you start to identify themes and process the information, so that comes in analysis and interpretation. And that's why it becomes phase 3.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification.
No problem. Yeah, I think a lot of students got this wrong for exactly that reason. Yeah, it's tricky because you are phase 2 is collection of, and you have to, okay, so this is where I get into the philosophical thing. The textbook authors have split things into very distinct phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. But as a scientist, when I'm collecting data, I'm analyzing while I'm collecting too, okay? It's just instinctive, you can't help yourself. So to me, I often find that the tail end of phase 2 and the early part of phase 3 are often overlapping, okay? But I wanted to stick to the book, and as per the book, that would be a phase 2 kind of situation. But yeah, in real life, when I'm doing my research, I'm processing, I'm not waiting to collect everything. I'm starting to process the data as I have it coming in. I have one more chat comment I'll address, and then I'll go back to the questions. He says, thank you. Okay, you're welcome. Did we do this already? Let's take a look. Oh yeah, we did this. Sensory data. Okay, question 11. When constructing a researchable question, the question must be very narrow and very specific, and you all know the answer why, because you want a very defined objective so that you can answer a very specific question. So anything that is very broad, be constructed in a way to capture the most information possible about the research topic, incorrect. Must incorporate global issues, incorrect. Must be asked in a way as to include a wide range, no. In some situations, and sometimes in qualitative research, you are trying to understand the entire problem. So your question, even though it's narrow, you're still trying to capture a lot more information in qualitative research. But the question is still narrow. The question isn't very, very broad. You're not trying to capture everything about every phenomenon. And that's a question that's there in the quiz later. So I thought we will address it a second time when we see it. Question 12. According to the text, you can start a research process anywhere. These are all good starting points, except, the keyword being except. Well, science fiction novels. You could argue that I can do some thematic analysis on science fiction novels and look for whether men are overrepresented compared to women. But we're looking at realistic scenarios where, yes, that's an exceptional situation where you would look at science fiction novels. Like we have a researcher at Huntington who looks at Disney films, okay? And that is their starting point, but it's not typical. It's very atypical. Typical things are observations, family decisions, and news reports. And for that reason, the exception here is a science fiction novel. According to your textbook, it is important. Oh, the chat question, chat comment. Okay, yes. Yep, yeah, she's a wonderful prof, but that's the research interest, right? Excellent. According to the text, it's important to return to your literature review after the data. So you got to do it once before you start, so you can complete phase 1 properly. But then you got to go back to it again after analysis, because that's when you start to compare your research with your findings with existing research, right? So your choice number 3 would be correct in this case. Make certain that your findings do not contradict the findings of previous research. Yeah, that's not only wrong, that's completely unethical, because now you're starting to tweak and curate your data and cook it. So that's not okay. Correct mistakes that previous researchers. No, that's not the objective of going back to the literature. Anyway, so the correct choice is compare your findings to existing research. A positive relationship between two concepts can be a positive relationship between two concepts can be diagrammed in a way such that the blank concept is represented as the one to which the arrow points. So so the arrowhead, it will always point towards the dependent. Okay, so that's why your choice is the dependent. The arrow will start from the independent and point to the dependent. Question 15. A research objective is the preferred guide to research when a researcher's aim is to blank what is rather than to blank what is. A research objective is more preliminary than a hypothesis, especially in quantitative research. So the aim would be to describe, the first blank would be describe, and rather than to test, because quantitative research with a hypothesis you're testing for, you already assume an association or a relationship, and then you test for. So yeah, when you don't know enough, you start with a research question, you try to describe what's going on, and obviously you're not trying to test for at that time. An example of a hypothesis is four different choices. The more parties a student attends, the lower the student's academic performance. Yes, that is the right choice. A hypothesis isn't meant to describe, because that's what a research question does. So option number 2 is incorrect. To determine the number and percentage, well, a hypothesis suggests a relationship. So this is not a relationship. This is just descriptive stats to determine the number and percentage of elderly people in a particular community who require special accommodation. Yeah, to observe a particular child for a specified, to observe patterns. Again, this is a research question type of thing. So your option is choice number 1. Question 17. Everyone got question 16 right. I don't, yeah, and question 17 too. I don't think anyone had an error on that. Blank are categories into which ideas, impressions, and observations of the world can be placed. And we spoke about this. This is concepts, right? So they're the big baskets of ideas. So the correct choice is concepts. Question 18. A variable. A variable, the word suggests that it varies, right? So obviously it cannot be something that remains constant. I don't know what it means by saying represents a concrete concept, but I liked it, so I just stuck it in there. A variable is something that can be measured but cannot be observed, and that makes no sense, right? How can you measure something but you cannot observe? Observe doesn't mean observe visually. Observe means be able to recognize a change. So if you can measure something, you can observe it. You can't do one without the other. Well, you can't measure without observing. You can observe without measuring. Anyway, so the correct choice is a variable is a type of concept that varies in amount or quality. At the conceptual level, that means when everything is a concept or in the form of concepts, at a conceptual level, a hypothesis asserts a relationship between concepts. When does it assert a relationship between variables? At what level does it do that?
When you're operating, oh God, I can't say it.
Operationalize.
That's the one.
Yes, that one. Yeah, yeah. Good, Tree. Were you going to say the same thing?
Yes, I was.
Okay, yeah, I see. When it's, thank you. Yeah, so when it's operationalized, that's when, then there's a relationship between variables. Obviously, ideas and theories are completely wrong, so they don't count. One problem raised by questions of validity. Validity is the idea that the variable is actually relevant to the concept. So one of the problems, obviously, is variables represent a concept, but we have to understand that concepts are baskets of ideas, right? So when we talk about health and you have a variable saying aerobic capacity, it's very easy for us to recognize that it discounts power, it discounts strength, it discounts flexibility, it discounts other physical parameters such as bone density, absence of disease. So the problem with validity of concepts is that concepts are multidimensional. Okay, concepts aren't measurable. It's the variables that are measurable. So that's an incorrect answer. Accountability doesn't figure into this question in any shape or form. Neither does recordable. So the only correct answer here is because concepts are multidimensional. The authors argue that a guiding principle of all good research is to let the blank determine the data collection strategy. How are you going to pick up the data? Or is it going to be interviews? Is it going to be focus groups? Is it going to be questionnaires? Will it be, what's it going to be? And that is determined by the research question. If you're measuring attitudes, you're going to have attitudinal scales, right? So your collection strategy is going to be determined by a research question. Someone could vaguely argue, well, to get to the collection strategy, you may have to refer to literature, but literature review is for a broad set of things. It points you in the right direction, but in the end, once you've made a decision as to, what kind of a research question you're going to have, then that is what is going to, in the end, determine how you pick up all the information. What's the basic goal of qualitative research? And you have different choices here. Determine how many qualitative and quantitative. The basic goal of qualitative research is to do blank, whereas the basic goal of quantitative research is to blank. So qualitative will obviously not do how many, so you can eliminate option number one. Describe what is going on, that's phenomenology. So, and yeah, qualitative research does go ahead to describe. Tree, go ahead, please.
So I almost got this one wrong because I often misread qualitative and quantitative. So I just caught myself, I think, on that one.
Well, you and me both, Tree. And I've only been teaching this course for 8 years, and when I read questions, sometimes I flip them around and I get so mad at myself. So, yeah, you have to read them carefully. Yeah, I'm glad you caught yourself. There's someone in the chat window. I will address that chat. Maybe a relevant comment or a question. I don't know. Let's see. I get confused. Yeah, I mean, I don't think students get confused. I mean, all of you know the difference. It's just that I wish they would call quantitative research as numerical research, have an N there, no Q's and no T's, right? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Just have it with a completely different set of letters. So when you're reading things quickly, trying to write an exam, or even when you're just reading and people have a mixed methodology or something, it doesn't create unnecessary headaches. Okay. Anyway, that's I didn't make up those terms, so sorry. 23. If a researcher has limited experience with a community that she wishes to investigate. So for a lot of us, that would be any could be if you're trying to work with, say, a mining community up north, maybe a fly-in First Nations community. All these are examples where we have limited experience. If we have limited experience as researchers, what should we do? So what's a priority? Yeah, you're supposed to declare preconception and share them with other experts, and that's great to avoid any biases. That's important. Find information about the community from official sources. Yeah, that's also kind of important. But really, the most important thing is when starting communication with this community, even before research, is to listen to the members of the community, because they're going to tell you what is the problem that is important to them. And keep in mind, communities own the data that's collected from them. They're owners. It's even more true in case of Aboriginal researchers, where there's an emphasis on that, right? And the fourth option is simply irrelevant at this point. That was just tossed in. So the correct answer is listen to members of the community. Inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is the idea that you interview a few people, but you kind of get a sense for things. You create a theory, and you hope that that theory is applicable to a lot more people. So that's inductive from the ground up. So the question is, in the process of inductive reasoning and qualitative researcher, the researcher, and this is where it's different from having. You still have to have a defined question. But if you're going to interview a person and you're getting all these different themes that are coming out of your interview, there are different aspects to a social problem. So let's think of a social problem. Let's think about, say, seeking admission to university. I don't pose that as a problem, I'm posing that as a situation. There are several aspects that determine why a student chooses a certain university. You have factors like proximity to home, tuition, where they gain admission, choice of program, the ability to use multiple languages to be able to take their courses. What else can we think of? Perhaps a sports affiliation in a sport that they're good at, so they can probably look for a sports scholarship. So there are many aspects, many themes. So if you're interviewing a student who has applied to, say, Laurentian, you can't just say, well, tell me about why you applied to Laurentian and only tell me about the financial aspect of it, or only tell me about the geographical aspect of it. No, that's not how it is. So even though the question remains narrow, in inductive reasoning, to understand a problem in the context that it was created, you have to actually understand several things, several factors, or in fact, all factors if possible. All is might not be possible, but as many as are provided to you. I think everybody got this question right. Blank researchers place great value on the individual voices of the participants in the study. Definitely not quantitative. Positivist is, research that suggests a relationship between two different things. It's basically qualitative, okay? Phenomenological is what's going on, but it's not necessarily, you could do that even through observation. So that doesn't really encompass the voices of the participants. The correct answer is qualitative. Okay, thinking a situational question. Lucia wants to study problem gamblers. Her research question contains two important concepts. There's two concepts, right? Socioeconomic status, as you know, very broad thing. It could be how much money you have, what your net worth is, or what is your annual income, or what your disposable income is. So, it's a big concept. And gambling is also a broad concept, because gambling can be of many types. So this is just, we're looking at the sequence of what you should have. So what do you have to first do? So option number 1 is obviously wrong, because choice 1 and 2 are flipped around. You have to define the concepts first before you select the variables. And once you have the variables, then you go to measurement. So that makes choice number 2 incorrect. You don't devise the measuring instrument before you devise the units of measurement. So again, 1, 2, and 3 are wrong. Your only correct answer is number 4. 27. The basic data collection techniques that researchers use for measuring variables are, and this is more from a qualitative perspective, but all of the choices are the same way. It's not that we've put anything quantitative there. Since there is the option of multiple techniques, your most correct answer is all of the below, or choice 1, which is, you don't have an option for all of the below, but choice 1 would be the correct answer. Okay, hopefully everyone read this question correctly. The following question does not provide data that can be counted or measured. Examining records and documents, they do provide information. Interviewing does, observation does. It's only when you write the research report, you're not actually looking for data. You're writing about what you did. So that is the correct answer, which is the second choice in this setup. 29. So again, a qualitative research question, the following statement best describes the measurement of variables in qualitative research. The researcher develops the measuring instrument and unit of measurement after interaction with the participants has been completed. That is incorrect because researchers will often start with something and they'll keep working with the measuring instrument and units of measurement as they're going through their interviews, tweaking it as they move forward to make it more sensitive and more effective. So anything that approximates that choice is the closest answer. Generally, qualitative researchers do not use variable. No, that is incorrect. Qualitative researchers, if the first part of their study with an open-ended question where they're going in to identify concepts, that is a limited situation in which they may not use variables because they're still identifying concepts. But once that phase is done, they do have concepts and then variables. So the correct answer is the third choice. Once a variable is selected, once you know what can change, okay, then the researcher starts looking at the measuring instrument and the unit of measurement while they're interacting with their participants. The researcher develops the measuring instrument and unit of measurement prior to interacting with the participant. That is incorrect because nothing is pre-decided to that degree in qualitative research. Okay. This one isn't as tricky as it sounds, but I was surprised that a lot of students got this incorrect, and that's okay. We're here to learn, so that's fine. Olivia has decided to analyze the opinion columns of 3 leading Canadian newspapers over the course of 3 months in order to determine whether or not differences exist regarding the treatment of offenders. She assumes that conservative newspapers are more likely to advocate harsher sentencing of offenders, such as long prison terms without probation, whereas liberal newspapers are more inclined towards rehabilitative approaches such as psychological counseling and community service work. Olivia's unit of analysis. So what is she collecting? That's, so unit of analysis is what is she collecting? What is she actually using? And the correct answer is opinion columns, because she's not going to worry about political differences. She's looking for pieces of information. She's not looking for the general commentary on. So really, I mean, it's not newspapers. The choice is opinion columns. Lots of students picked newspapers. I don't think anyone picked political differences in treatment of offenders. Everybody got this one right. The unit of measurement is degrees Celsius. First step of the research process is, and I think everyone got this one right, 2 is to identify a research problem. In contrast to qualitative research, as we load, qualitative opinions, inductive research, all that fun stuff. Quantitative research tests the relationship between 2 or more variables. You have 4 choices. You can always argue that a lot of quantitative research can be descriptive as well, especially descriptive statistics. So for example, what's the breakup of people speaking different languages in our gerontology class of Gero 3127? That's a quantitative question. It doesn't suggest any relationship. We can make a pie chart and it could be completely descriptive. So it would be descriptive stats. But given the choices that you have, what's the best choice? And that's where the choice is, it tests the relationship between 2 or more variables. (34) Among the kinds of possible relationships between variables, the following is logically impossible. So variables, you have dependent and an independent variable, which you think is dependent or independent. They can just be associated. So when one changes, the other changes, but it may not be because there might be something hidden there which you don't see, which is the actual cause of the change, but they look like they're changing with each other. Okay. And it's like, let's say, as a what's a good example of where you have 2 things change, but they're not actually related? as a child's foot size increases, so does their height. Okay. Yeah, they're related because they're all related to growth. It's not necessarily those are not necessarily the cause and effect of each other. Okay. Variables can be related, causally related. So when the child's growth occurs, their height and weight increase. So there's a cause and effect. Variables can neither be causally related or associated. Yeah, it's possible to have two variables which are not related or associated. But what can't happen is if you have one being the cause of the other, you cannot say they're not associated. Causality is an association all by itself. It's the strongest form of association. So choice number 1 is correct. Okay, where are we? Okay, when collecting data using, so you have to choose. When collecting data using blank, the researcher interviews participants but does not have a list of questions. And the answer is unstructured interviews because, yeah, there's no predetermined plan to come, and there's an idea to talk about a central theme. So there might be a question, but there isn't a list of questions, and the interviewer works with the interviewee in determining the flow of information. The blank research design is the only design capable of testing a causal hypothesis, cause and effect. And the answer is the experimental study. And in an experiment, you can control for confounding variables. So that's why you can show that A causes B and so on. You don't have to worry about associations alone. Blank research designs ask the question, is there a change in the difference between the experimental group and the control group following the manipulation of the independent variable? So one of the things in an experiment is you ask, if I change one, will the other change? So if I vaccinate someone with the COVID vaccine, will they be immune? Has their immunity changed, right? So you have a group that gets saline and you have a group that gets the vaccine. Obviously, it's unethical to give them both COVID-19. So all you do is you do an antibody test, right? That's what you do to check if they have immunity. And if your vaccine's working, the people whose immunity has been manipulated, so the immunity here would be the independent variable. If you manipulate their immunity, their immune status, which is the dependent variable, would have changed. Okay, so this would again, the answer is an experimental study design. All of the following are ways that the researcher can control the influence of other variables in their study. So there are many ways to control the influence of other variables in your study, except how, you can control by, you can take into account all of them when designing your study. You can list other influential variables, so you can comment on their role in affecting the result. You can be aware that other variables might influence the data. But what you can't do is ignore everything else other than the variables being studied. That's an ostrich head in the sand kind of situation. It does happen from time to time. 39. We didn't cover this in class, but it is in your textbook, and it's a nice read. So blank is a research methodology that's gained popularity over the past 2 decades and is often used to give voice to the voiceless. And the answer here is photo voice. Photo voice is a process where participants will often take pictures or short videos of themselves and also speak about the picture and videos. Last question. All of the following are qualitative research methodologies except. And the answer is experimental research. And qualitative methodologies, you don't do experiments. That's more of a quantitative design. Okay. All right, so that is the discussion on the midterm. For the final exam, we won't be able to do it because typically or traditionally how it works is the final exam, you can get feedback from the professor, but it's more of a one-on-one thing. There will be no classes at that point. So if you feel that your final exam you'd like to know where you went wrong or whatever it is, or maybe, yeah, I don't know if it's, yeah, because you can't save your exams either. I was thinking that maybe I'll provide the answers to you after. That might be a possibility. I might be able to provide the answers to all the questions afterwards. Yeah, I'll think about it. I mean, but at the moment, there's no facility for us to discuss the answers except on a one-on-one basis for the final exam, and that might work. You know, some of you might be more curious than others. Some of you might not care. So, well, there's a post in the chat window. I will address that, and then we'll go on to our slides. D2L is still open after the exams, and I would like to see that. Yeah, we can do that. So, you know, one of the ways what we can do is that there's a different way that we can do it. When you answer, I don't know how students would find this. As you're going through the exam, every time you answer a question, when you answer it correct, obviously it tells you, let me ask everyone first. When you answered the questions, did it tell you whether you got it right or wrong as soon as you answered it? Okay, so I can make that change for the final exam. What I can do is, but you have to tell me if you want that or no, because I don't want it to turn like, it can also be a mood ruiner, right? If you notice that you got 3 questions wrong in a row, then it might just get you more upset. And rather than doing pretty well, you might actually do worse because now you're mad that you didn't. Is that okay? Let's have a, I'm just gonna, I'd rather not know. Okay, so it's yeah, we can't make separate arrangements for everyone. And I don't want to do a democratic thing in this situation. Yeah, afterwards is better. My challenge with afterwards is as follows. I don't mind designing. I change my exams every year, but I still guard my pool of questions closely. So I'm afraid that the questions will be leaked, which is all right, I guess. I suppose I shouldn't worry too much about it. All right, we'll make it available after the exam. Artika says, I'd rather not know. Steph says, I agree with everyone else. Steph, everyone has a different opinion. Okay. So you know what I'll do? I will make the answers available, not during the test, because some students would prefer to go through the entire test without being distracted about whether they got something right or wrong. You know, if I was writing a test, it doesn't, I don't enjoy knowing it right then. Yeah, we'll do it after the exam, and we'll keep it available for a limited time. You know, what we can do is maybe around the April 15th, April 20th mark, I will make that available. Everyone can take a quick look, and then it'll disappear. We'll have it available for, like, I don't know, maybe a 2-hour stretch where you can look at all the questions, go through everything, and then it'll be gone. Okay, and I'll let everyone know. I'll send an email saying, well, the answers are out for your final exam. And what that'll also do is it'll tell you where you went wrong. Okay. All right, good. On to the lecture slides. So last time we spoke, thank you, Tree. Last time we spoke about quantitative data presentation. We did a bunch of different things. We looked at some Excel sheets. Qualitative data does not need you to understand or know Excel. That's not the objective, and data is presented quite differently. Now, your textbook, the chapter is relatively small, but there are a few things. Read it well. One of the things you probably realized from your midterm is it's good to have an idea, but to answer things well, you have to read in a little bit more detail and actually it's not a memory test. Like you're memorizing everything wouldn't have helped you on the midterm. It won't on your final either. It's just about reading carefully and understanding the material. So same idea for moving forward. Sorry, that was off target, but anyway, qualitative, you don't need any of those Excel sheets. There are different ways we have qualitative research, right? We have observations, and observation is a very basic technique. It still requires planning and alertness. There are two basic forms of observation, non-participant observation and participant observation. And regardless of what you do, there are a couple of observations that are relevant to both forms. So you can look at the whole situation. You can look at the participants in the situation, and then you can try to make a cohesive picture from both of them. And then the third most important thing is what you perceive given your own preconceptions, your biases, your values. And you might be surprised when things work out a certain way. Typically, if you are surprised, it points also towards an existing bias towards a certain context or a situation. And as researchers get better with their observational analysis, what they're able to do is they're able to jot down their observations separate from the event that occurred. And the example in your textbook is you're at a long-term care facility. I don't think they talk about a long-term care facility, but let's use that example. And older adults are lined up to gather their meal. And you notice one of the older adults keeps elbowing the person ahead of them to make them want them to go faster or to get their attention or whatever it is. And you observe what you think is a certain expression on their face. So what you observe is a physical attempt to solicit attention or to create an action from one resident onto another. Your reaction might be, when you look at the expression on the person's face, is the person behind is really frustrated. They're getting agitated. They're probably going to have a responsive behavior now, and they are irritated with the person in front of them. So you see how this box, the data recording sheet, is distinct in you objectively denoting what you see and what your reaction is to the same situation. They're both the same situation, and you are observing both. So what that does essentially is it kind of creates a framework within which these events are occurring. And reactions and thoughts would also be, you could also indicate in that box, I was surprised by this, or this is quite expected because all these older adults are in middle to more advanced stages of dementia, where their social skills and their cognitive abilities are quite considerably different from older adults who are at a stage of lesser cognitive decline. So these might be your observations, your thoughts when you're thinking about it. But the reason for making this distinction is, as you start to make your observations, you're creating the framework around it. This is an example of coding, and coding is, if you look on the left, it says topics or issues, and it's, your different topics are looking for employment. And when you look for employment, they break it down into, well, there's the racial discrimination aspect that prevents people from getting employed, because that's what people tell you. So let's assume you have a bunch of interviews and you're talking to racialized people, and this is what they're telling you about employment. So when you're looking for employment, you look at different sub-themes. That's racial discrimination. Then you look at people who are new immigrants saying, oh, it is so difficult, I don't understand what people tell me. So then there's the language barrier. And then some people come and saying, oh, they only like young people, I'm too old, they won't, you hear things like that. So you identify themes and then sub-themes, and some people say they've never worked before. And then you start to, on the right, when it says interviews and page numbers, it's the assumption is you've transcribed all the interviews in your record keeping book, and they're on different pages verbatim as the interviewee said to you. And you're starting to, when you talk about racial discrimination, you look at which page it is, which section it is, and which line it is, and so on. And so in this situation, what they've done is they've identified. So if you're looking at this table very carefully, they've done a few different things. They've identified each sub-theme. They've identified where it occurs. And what they do is they put a numerical total at the end of it. So they say it's occurred 5 times, or this has occurred 2 times. This is an interesting way to analyze. This is a code book. It's an interesting way to analyze when you start using mathematical terms, because is an event, is an incident more important because it's appeared more times, or is it more important because it's more intense and has actually influenced the person more? And those are tough questions, but researchers have to choose one path or the other to move forward. So if they pick a semi-qualitative, quantitative way, as they've proposed here, then they'll go ahead and justify talking about important themes, saying, well, clearly racial discrimination is most important here because most people find that that's one of the biggest barriers. Racism, ageism, and then work experiences is a distant third. Right? So this is, you have to code for themes. So when you read stuff, the theme might not pop out to you in the same words as it's written in the code. A lot of it is interpretation. So the person who is telling you that, well, they don't give us jobs because they don't like how we look, they don't probably know the word racial discrimination, but that's up to the researcher to say, okay, well, this is what's happening here. Or the people that say, it's only for the young people. You know what it is. The interviewee probably does not know the term age discrimination, but that's where it fits, right? Same thing with social networks. When people say, oh, I miss my family, I wish that they're all in the Philippines, I wish I could meet them. So, they are socially a little bit disconnected. When you ask them, well, do you go out and hang out with friends? They say, oh, no, I have no friends. I just come back and watch TV. And, so you put that in family connections, or and so on. So it's from the researcher's perspective, the interviews you get and the language that the interview is in, it has to be coded in different ways to be able to use that information for your research. Your textbook also focuses on something called an actions framework. An actions framework is, we all have certain behavioral, we engage in different behavioral practices or typical actions. Okay, these make social life possible. Let me give an example. I see you on Zoom and I wish all of you good morning. Okay. And most of you respond back either in text or verbally saying, hey, good morning. And this is a social contract, right? When you typically in our culture in Canada, when we greet somebody, they greet you back. Or when we pass to, and again, it's big city, small city stuff that also occurs, but usually in smaller towns, it's quite normal for people walking across the street in opposite directions to wave to each other or to say hello. Okay, that's your typical actions, and that's normal. And somebody who did not do that would be seen as an unfriendly person or someone who's socially distant. Right? In a big city like Toronto or London, or London as in London, UK, like really big city, it's not abnormal for people to just walk right past each other. It's not abnormal for people to not greet each other, even if they're neighbors in homes. Typically, apartment dwellers do greet each other because the proximity is much greater. So those are all typical actions which are constructed according to the society around us. Your textbook makes the example of how Muslims greet each other. Typically, when Muslims greet each other, they greet each other by saying "Salam alaikum." Assalamu alaikum is, I greet you, so on. Then the wearing of certain clothes. In people who are raised Hindu, like I was, the typical greeting is a namaste. Shaking hands has become a more universal sign of greeting. So when someone puts their hand forward, you would typically shake them. Now, in a very East Indian context, if you were to go to India and you were to put your hand out to a person of the opposite gender, it is possible for the person to respond with a namaste instead of shaking your hand. And it's a framework. It's basically your action framework. Let's see, we have something on the chat window. I'll just address that for a second. I'm gonna exit. Momina says, oh, thank you, Momina. I appreciate that. Sending God's blessing when we say salam, right? Thank you. So that's what salam alaikum mean. Thank you, Momina. That's helpful. So we all do different things, greet each other, we behave a certain way with each other. So for people from South Asia, that would mean like our families of like Momina, myself, Artika. If you were to go to our resident countries of origin and you went to people's homes, the first thing they would offer you is water. They wouldn't even ask, it would come. And the second thing would be an offering of a cup of tea or coffee, which is, it's just a cultural framework. That's the situation in which it occurs. Okay, so that's just how it is, and it's different to understand what's going on there if you don't understand that this is all built into the culture. And that's what a typical action framework is. It describes the action in the context. Anita says the same in Africa. So it describes the action in the context of a culture. So that's what an action framework is all about. So they talk about that in your textbook. So, go ahead, review that. If you have any questions, we can talk about that next class. I thought we might be short on time because we're going to discuss the exam, but we actually have a whole bunch of time. So does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments at this point? You're most welcome for the exam review. I'm happy to do it. Yes, the final exam is also 40 questions. But I have increased the time limit for the final. Yeah, most welcome. For the final exam, what I've done is I've increased the time limit to 2 hours. You don't need 2 hours because for the 40 questions that we did for the midterm, most people used anywhere from 25 minutes to 38 minutes, most. Okay, so the reason I've kept it at 2 hours is just to give you enough room and space to be comfortable. And if there are letters of accommodation and stuff, you can even have more time. I don't have a problem with that, but we're still going the lockdown browser. I don't know how to calm people who have camera anxiety. It's just that I'm not at the other end and I don't really get to see all of you taking the exam. It's more as a deterrent to prevent copying. And I know you don't, like all of you are honest students, but that's a requirement. I mean, supervision is expected for an exam, okay? So we have to play by the rules for that. But other than that, well, you're all free to leave and we will see everybody on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend and well, see you soon.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Krishnan.
Oh, you're very welcome, Suzanne. Take care. Bye.